All right, Hogs. This is Hog Planet, and it's Sam only, no Dan today, which is why we probably fucked up the intro. I don't know how to do any of that shit. I'm not one of these radio guys. I just talk, but here to talk with me, I have brought JR and Kevin from our Okja episode. Say what up to the people.
What's up?
Jason, say what
Hi.
up.
Yeah, I think,
Do it now.
I can turn my mic on.
You got to keep yourself unmuted.
All right, so I wanted to just have an episode where I talk about all the weird things that I think about, but I also wanted to not be just ranting into the mic like a lunatic, which I have done before, and I thought about doing it again, honestly. But it's more fun to talk about this with friends, especially if they're smarter than you are, and I think that that's the case here. I brought two smart friends on to talk about some kind of fun theoretical shit. We're going to talk about individualism and how it's yeah, and our negative take on it. How could something that's presented as such an unalloyed good be something that I want to talk shit about? Well, because I think it gets in the way of everything. I think that right now we're facing global challenges like pandemics and climate change that pose a threat to society and the world population as a whole. But we as individuals frequently feel more atomized than ever. What's more, there seems to be a lot of confusion around the topic of individualism. Individual victories are often touted as collective victories, while collective victories are often reduced to the individual actions of a single person. So I want to ask, like, how did we get to this stage? Is individualism we're gonna fuck it up like 9,000 times. It's too long of a word to say that often. Is individualism a natural state of mind for humans, or does that question even matter? How can we encourage people to think collectively, and what would that even look like? How would our media, institutions, and conversations change if the good of the collective finally dethroned the cult of individualism?
Nice. Thank you so much, Sam, for having me to talk shit about indie music. I'm so excited.
Yeah. Yeah, we're actually here to shit on the Brooklyn indie rock of the late 2000s. Animal Collective, we're coming from.
Oh, amazing. I'm so excited. Your piano's out of tune.
Why don't you play some more synthesizers? Well, I don't know. Okay, so individualism is like obviously a very broad topic. So I think it might help to get into it a little bit with a way that something that is a big way that we're all seeing the clash between individualism and a kind of more collective mindset. And I think that the first thing I said, the pandemic, and by that I mean the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Do you guys hear lots of boomers and older people making the joke like, "Oh, what pandemic? What do you mean? Was something going on in the last week?" I feel like everyone has made that joke to me who's over the age of 40.
I've actually never heard that, but maybe I'm not. Yeah, maybe you have more exposure to boomers than I do.
Yeah, I don't think I've talked to boomers outside of my job.
All right. Well, maybe come down from your ivory tower someday, your gilded university life, and you'll have to rub elbows with me and my K Street law firm and talk to some real people.
Yeah, I only hang with Gen Xers, sorry, or Gen Zers.
All you do is listen to like Billie Eilish and say "Ya Yeet" or whatever.
Exactly.
So either way, with the pandemic, it's something that obviously affects all of us. Potentially, basically everyone could get sick, and because it's a virus that spreads between people and is communicated through by person to person. It's something that you can't hide from, but there's a mentality that you could. There's a mentality that you can be an island at this time when you're clearly not. There's a lot of like ways we could approach this. For me right now, the thing that I'm seeing in DC is they're going to bring back the indoor mask mandate starting on Saturday. And my office is going to be requiring masks, but they're also still trying to say that we have to go into the office every so often and stuff because they want to keep this whole capitalist machine a running. But I don't know. It's something that's interesting to me because ever since the CDC kind of walked back its initial statement that like if you're vaccinated, then people don't really have to wear masks inside anymore. They walked it back and they said something like, "We thought we could trust people to make the right decision, but they just won't do it, and we miscalculated. And I'm like, well, yeah, you fucking did. Number one, like, you're an agency, you're a government agency and a public health agency. You're supposed to take shit like that into account.
Right.
Right? Am I
I don't
talking
think
crazy here?
I don't think they have sociologists on the board, the CDC, which they should. But yeah, they don't give a shit about social forces. So
Yeah, you might be right about that, honestly. It's something that like was so patently ridiculous to me, because when they first relaxed the mask mandate, I was like, oh great, so it's like up to the honor system for people in this like dumbass country where like individual freedom is specifically the most important possible thing. Don't tread on me. It's a HIPAA violation if you ask me if I'm vaccinated, like all this other nonsense. It really like shows like how futile it is and how useless it is, and how like ill-equipped I think people are to even like a government agency, a public health agency is like saying, oh, we thought we could just fix this on the individual level. And I'm like, what the fuck? So I don't know. How do you guys feel about like individualism and like COVID-19, especially with like the moment we're at now?
there's a lot to say. JR, you want to go? You want to start us off?
Sure. Yeah, basically, there's no other way that they could have handled this. This is the most like American response possible. I don't think there's I mean, there was obviously an alternative that would have been better, but this was always going to be the outcome,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
There's just no, I don't know, we don't really even have like a government like other countries.
Right.
Other countries that I also think are bad, but like at least they have like functioning institutions, or more
Right.
functioning than ours.
Right. Yeah, I think it really shows our very American response really shows the function of the state and the role of the government, and what they feel their job is in service to the people or citizens or countries or whatever, the world, even in a pandemic. And it's that I think there's a solid reason why people have so much distrust for the government and the state and stuff like that, because once you reduce like an entire pandemic to the individual actions of like a teenager, then what is your purpose anymore? It's not like you're necessarily making the vaccine either. You're in charge, entrusting that to the capitalists and actually the workers who are working on the vaccine. And then you're also pointing to the workers to be like, hey, you better wear a mask because you're the reason that the pandemic's going to keep continuing. And so I think, I don't know, I don't know what my original point was, but I think that the trust in the state, especially in response to this, is it's very rational. I think even when we look at like anti-vaxxers and anti-maskers, like obviously I don't agree with them, but I don't think the liberal response is that great either. And I think it shows, again, distrust for the state, because what is liberal action? It's hyper individualization again, like wear your mask shaming, and all these, like, it's just hard for us to believe that the role of a state is to protect us outside of our individual actions. So I think yeah, I don't know, it's a very contentious time and no one has the answers, but we just seem to want to just blame each other and other individuals and feel good about the stuff that we do in this.
Right. Whereas I want to blame just everyone wholesale. I think it's interesting what you said, though, because I don't want to make this to be interpreted as like, oh, if everyone was just like like, I don't want to seem like we're punching down only on, obviously like like you said, the anti-maskers or the anti-vaxxers, right, or like the Marjorie Taylor Greene people, and like, who believe that like this is all a liberal conspiracy, and like their individual freedom to not wear a mask trumps the collective freedom of all of us not to die from, an illness or have our like loved ones die from it. But the liberal response to it is also hyper individualistic. It seemed they sound sometimes like they're making a more collective appeal, but it genuinely is. It does come down to individuals, and it comes down to, like you said, Kevin, shaming other people, to being like, so one person not wearing a mask is not the cause of COVID continuing to spread, but liberals would have you believe that in a weird way. Like they would say like, oh, well, that one person is indicative of more people who are also like that. And I'm like, I don't know. Again, it's like on both sides of the mainstream political discourse on this, there's never any idea that there could be any kind of like collective response to it, because like I think a big part of it is because like you guys have said, the American state is kind of withered at this point. Even though the federal government has in some ways more power than it's ever had, it also doesn't have any wherewithal to carry out what it wants to do. And I don't know. I remember early on in COVID being like, oh, this is going to kick our ass for a number of obvious reasons, like our dog shit healthcare system. But I saw like in China, they were like building hospitals like rapid fire, like, talking about a state where like, I don't want to like, again, we can President Xi, I'm sorry if you're listening to this. I know I don't like to criticize you. I want to come live in China when the US falls apart. But I may have one or two disagreements with the way the Chinese government is run. I might. I'm not saying definitively whether I do or not. But even like in a place like Jason, like you said, like somewhere that's kind of like, I don't agree with everything they do. I was still like, at least they were able to like mobilize really quickly and like on a mass scale like that. Whereas like that capability just doesn't exist here for a number of reasons. But I think the big reason is individualism and like privatization, which is also like an outgrowth of individualism.
Exactly. Like I think when you see like China, like you feel their power. Like let's say you're a citizen, you see them erect a hospital in the span of 5 days. You're like, oh shit, my state exists. You know what I mean? Like, but like we're sitting here, it's like, what the fuck? Like I have to watch Biden talk about shit on the TV, but then like I don't see the state, I don't perceive the state except policing. You know what I mean? Like it's not like we have some emergency COVID task force, like, or healthcare for that matter. Sorry.
Shit, I'm too high. Hold on.
Classic hog planet thing. It'll come back to you.
The only people left who trust the American government or like the only people left who don't think the American government is just like shitty and evil on the left or the right, like it's just the liberals that live around you, Sam, down in the by Langley.
The last
I'm not out in the woods in Virginia anymore. I live in the district. I've upgraded. I used to live next to liberals who make $200,000 a year. Now I live next to liberals who make like $400,000 a year. Moving up in the world, but
they like are so condescending about it too. Like they've given like nobody trusts them on the left or the right, broadly defined, for a lot of times like different reasons. Sometimes I guess shared reasons, mostly different reasons. But neither side trusts the government. The only people who do are the liberals, who happen to be in charge for the most part. And then they have the gall to like turn around at people and be like, oh, like, why are you fucking this up?
Yeah.
Like, where's your mask? And it's like, nobody really wants to hear it from you guys.
Yeah, even a good idea when I see a liberal make
like
it,
I agree with
that,
masks, but
yeah, it's like that Onion article, like the heartbreaking, the worst guy made a point that's correct or whatever. No, I definitely agree with like, and the funny thing about liberals is that you're saying like they're the only people who trust the government, and that's true, but they also don't. Weirdly, because like who liberals trust more than anyone is Amazon. Like they love Amazon. Every liberal I know is like, I love Amazon, even though their companies, their labor practices
pure
aren't
efficiency.
Great. They're
it's
like,
so nice you can choose.
Yeah,
they wish they had the guy who designed Amazon design Obamacare.
No, they and people in DC like talking about being near like some of the goofiest liberals of all time. Probably the highest concentration of Elizabeth Warren bumper stickers in this area than anywhere else in the world. To this day, even though she completely beefed that primary. The thing I see liberals around here are really into Amazon, and they wanted Jeff Bezos, because Jeff Bezos also lives like around here, or he has a house. It's the old textile museum, which should make you fucking furious. Talk about individualism running rampant. Like a single guy now lives in a museum, a former public museum. Just shows how fucking insane this has all gotten. But they wanted him to like take over the DC Metro, like the subway here. They were like, oh, wouldn't it be great if you could use your Amazon Prime membership to like swipe through the
My
no,
God.
seriously. And people here are actually like really happy, especially in Northern Virginia.
I mean, I
really
could
happy
see
about the
that.
second
Like
headquarters.
the last 2 weeks on Twitter, it's just liberals being like, Bezos is gonna take us to fucking Mars. Like, you know what I mean? It's like, why do you have so much
Well,
faith in this dude? Like,
that's what it's the individualism that
yeah,
it's baked into like the liberal ideology that like Bezos is perfect. Like
of course.
he is an individual
Yeah,
by
mhm.
by the fact of owning something, one, and two, like I don't know, owning more than everybody else. Like he's the ultimate individual.
Yeah, and he came from struggle. Like we love that's the part of the whole
He did
No,
individual
he didn't come from
narrative.
struggle.
No, he did
Oh,
not.
okay.
His parents were like Wall Street traders, and he worked on Wall Street before founding Amazon.
Well,
And I believe
don't
his parents gave
necessarily
him like
mean
like
poverty.
hundreds of thousands of dollars.
They
as
attribute
I
hard
don't
work to
I
him.
don't exactly. That's what I mean. Hard work. Like that's why we revere people like Musk. Like we love that narrative of like people worked for this. They built
Yeah,
this
it's a
empire.
lie, but
Yeah,
it's the narrative.
it's the narrative, and it's so like that's the problem with liberalism is obviously a status quo ideology, right? It exists to perpetuate the capitalist state, like, and that's what liberals don't understand. Like they love Bezos because they want to keep living like this. Like that's what liberalism is. But yeah, I lost my point. But either way, I always get distracted when I start talking about liberals.
No, definitely. And I think it's interesting to talk about individualism in the business world, because it's somewhere that like the individualism is like enshrined in, you know, billionaires, because they can really do whatever they want, especially someone like Bezos. I mean, literally like the richest man in the world. And when they announced that Jeff Bezos was going to step down from Amazon, my first thought was like, okay, so who cares? Like Amazon's still going to be an evil, fucking nasty company, and they're still going to be a great source of evil in the world. But then I realized, I'm like, yeah, you know, that's kind of like the dream, right? For an entrepreneur is to have a good exit, like to you know, get out and go do their new thing. And he gets to now be the space guy or something like that.
Yep.
He gets to be an individual now.
Yeah.
Like he gets to go assert like don't enjoy America's freedoms or the world's freedoms. The whole world's basically.
You know what's interesting? Trillbillies actually made this point, but I think it was super interesting. They were talking about how, you know, it's possible that Bezos like stepping out of Amazon was very much like a very PR move, because if you think about all like this last 10 years of like elevated class consciousness, I'm saying that in quotations, and like critique of the billionaires, like Amazon has a lot to gain by distancing itself from Bezos, because yeah, there
For the people listening to audio only, I have a hideous picture of Jeff Bezos with this stupid space cowboy hat and whatever kind of fillers or like cheek implants he got done before going on TV.
I have so much anger by looking at that picture. Like I just
Yeah, my neighbor stopped by just to say hi to the hogs, Jeff.
Oh my God. I fucking when are we gonna just like stop doing cowboy shit and stop wearing cowboy hats and like just when are we gonna like it's been a couple like centuries. Can we just enough? Like
no, literally never. It's because yeah, I mean you couldn't have like said it any better. When are we going to stop doing this? The cowboy mythos is nothing like what actual cowboys were like. It's sort of like, maybe this is like somewhere we can go with this, because we've been saying how individualism is so dumb and yada yada, but I think people don't realize how recent of a kind of ideology, especially in the way it is, it's imposed in the US, how recent that is and how constructed that is by like advertising and media. I mean, like the cowboy mythos has taken a long time to die. And most cowboys were black or Hispanic. They were not like white. But the you know,
like
the
literal
West,
cowboys, like
actual
cowboys.
Not like the outlaws. I mean,
not like Western,
not like cowboys in movies, but that's people do think that movies are more real than real life, which is a very 20th century thing. But but yeah, they're thinking like Jeff Bezos is dressing up like this not because he's like, oh, me going to space is the continuum of all these poor people who wrangled cows for a living. No, he's like drawing a line between him and like, you know, John Wayne, or like someone you would see on Gunsmoke or something like that. Like it's a very kind of like characterized, stylized idea of like this rugged individualist.
Right. it's the final frontier mythos. Like Grandin talks about this and Empire Workshop, but that's like our engine. Like everyone wants to be Bezos. Everyone wants to be a cyberpunk tech cowboy who's a capitalist and like has enough money to bring himself to space. Like, we all are craving this like individual who's gonna take us into space. Like, whose dog is that?
That's my dog Lou and his raccoon toy.
Special guest, Blue and the raccoon toy on this episode. That's right, 5 guests this time.
Does he want to come talk about individualism?
No, Lou is psyche is free from all that nonsense.
But see, this is a
Completely pure.
perfect example of how individualism has distracted from the common goal of the podcast, which is actually more of just my personal individual goal anyway. But either way,
sorry.
you're fine.
I don't remember where we were in the conversation necessarily.
So Kevin, you were saying some really interesting shit to me, which was like like space is like the final frontier, and the connection between, I think we can draw a connection between imperialism and maybe manifest destiny specifically, and individualism, because I don't know, a lot of the phrase, the "Go West, young man" slogan and stuff like that was very, and the Homestead Act, like the way the West was settled, or won, as white people like to put it, was very much on an individual basis. It was like, you'll go out there. Obviously, it was a government program, but it was a government program where they paid individuals to go out and like stake their own land and like improve the land, right. Which is also harkening back to this weird like Jeffersonian idea of like individual farmers cultivating the land, and of course some of those farmers might have the help of like a couple thousand slaves, but we don't need to mention that in the annals of history too much. But I don't know, like what do you guys think about like individual, like material or manifest destiny and individualism and American imperialism?
So I have a quick thing, Jason, Jason, go first.
Oh, okay. This image behind you of Jeff Bezos is like the cowboy hat's never going away. Like that is the United States. It's just like the most distilled, united. Like this might as well be the flag. This picture. Like,
oh my god! Actually, it'd be so much better if we just put Bezos on our flag, and like, it would make things so much easier.
But yeah, there's like you were saying, Kevin, Greg Grandin talks about it in his work, and it's originally from a historian at the turn of the 20th century, turn of the 19th century.
I don't know centuries.
I don't know the phrase. Well, anyway, it was like at 1900-ish. This guy,
turn of the 20th century.
Okay,
the turn of the 19th century into the 20th century.
Okay, right.
What century are we in now? I don't even.
The 21st century. What?
Okay.
Century Z.
All right. Anyway, this historian, I think it's Frederick Turner. I might be wrong about the name though. Had the frontier thesis, which is basically the United States was so successful because there was always land out west, that if there's social conflict of any kind, that there was a release valve in the West where you can send people to have their own land, like the Homestead Act, and kind of like reduce the social tensions. Now that like became what it was to be American in a certain way. Like that is the most individual you can get. That's the rugged individualism. We all kind of know what we're talking about. It's in that, like it's in the vocabulary of like everyday people, like pull yourself out of bootstraps and stuff like that. But that was like the ideal. And we've taken that past the West Coast and basically around the world. And Jeff Bezos is wearing a cowboy hat, just like the mythological cowboy of American film, or
Yeah, yeah,
Italian film, I guess, and literally has conquered the world and is going into space,
yeah.
to the final frontier.
Yeah.
It's funny though, because everything underneath him while he's in space is like in America is just hollowed out, like destroyed,
Of course.
just like falling apart. But
Falling
you
apart
know,
because of that. Yeah, and we all want to revere the thing that hollows us out, just so we
yeah,
could look at a
there's
picture
no,
of
it's on
Jeff
TV.
Bezos going into space, because that's what
Yeah,
we think we need.
And
celebrities
so
and
many people
stuff.
are like, this
That's
is
real
all
life.
I
It's massive.
have. Like, this is like, there's
Yeah,
so
yeah,
many
Exactly.
people were
exactly.
like, oh my, like, you can't let me just think it's cool that Jeff
Right.
Bezos went to space. And I'm
Yeah,
like, look, the Soviet
Right.
Union did exactly what he did in like this fucking 1960 or some shit. Like, number one, it's not even
Right.
that cool. So like, find something cooler. I don't know, read a book
Yeah,
like for
like
once in your life.
yeah, like
But
pick up a
I don't
guitar or
know.
something.
But yeah, they people were like, this is all I have, and there's no question of like, why don't I have anything else or any other
yeah.
Unfortunately,
meaning in
There's
my
no
life?
community
exactly.
anymore. There's
Yeah.
no mass politics of any kind. There's no sense of being able to like make a difference in public policy or political decision making or anything.
Yeah.
It's totally everybody's atomized and alienated and
Yeah.
isolated.
So, I mean, here's the thing. It's like really hard to blame these people because they're operating with the tools that are given to them, right?
Right.
Like the hegemonic tools of like consumerism and NGOs, like whatever, right? It's really hard to blame them. But Jason, I'm glad you brought that up because there's a link that I definitely want to make if we're going to talk about individualism. So I think it's important to distinguish, or at least define ideology and materiality when it comes to individualism, because when we talk about individualism, it's not necessarily just an idea, this idea of like self-reliance and like keeping to myself. Ideology is a very Marxist tool to help us point to the actual material relations of things, right? So I think when we think individualism, we have to link it to capital and capital expansion, because or else we're just talking about individualism out of the context of what's going on and how it actually serves capital expansion. So Jason, when you talked about like when the frontier, you know, of land grab and all that expanding globally, so we'll call that globalization, let's say. We're talking about how the frontier of capital expanded and how the need to incorporate poor countries or like quote unquote developing countries under the fold of capital for capital extraction, but also a global supply of labor to keep that capital flow going. So when we talk about individualism, we have to talk about the role of like, what is this ideology and how is it related to why Bezos can go to space? Like there's a real materiality behind this idea of individualism that actually is so pervasive that we can't even begin to think about how billionaires relate to it or how like these extractive practices of corporations relate to my individual identity and my lack of community, alienation from work and life and whatever, and even down to the family and like kinship groups. So everything is structured in this way. So when we're talking about individualism, we're also talking about global capitalism, like we have to be. And I think what Jason said really emphasizes that.
Yeah, Jason. Also, I wanted to mention when you talked about Frederick Jackson Turner's ideas about like the sort of like the West as like sort of a safety valve. That idea is not wasn't even new at his time. Before when the Americas were first settled by or by the British, they wanted to send like the worst people from British society, the people who were causing trouble, and who were, I mean, for lack of a better word, they were kind of individualists in that they weren't following the rules of society. And of course, England at that time was also going through kind of, the loss. It had already gone through like the loss of the Commons. And it was also trying to push a lot of those people out into Ireland to colonize that, which was like the trial run for colonizing the Americas. And when I thought it was really I'm thinking about Nancy Eisenberg's book White Trash, where she talks a lot about this and the way the frontier was always a place, even after like British people had sent their dregs of society, they would literally call them waste people. They would like send them out to the colonies. Then people in the colonies, once they started having money and building cities and like not eating one another and like shoes and shit to survive, they started to have the same problem, which is like these waste people who had been told that they could go out there and do whatever they wanted and go fuck off. And then they were like part of another society, because that's the only way humans can really like survive and propagate, because we don't really have that many skills on our own. Either way, so they would push them out to the frontiers, and like Andrew Jackson was very much a frontiersman on that. His support was the original term of crackers comes from like people who would settle the swamps in like North Carolina and stuff, like what was considered the West when Americans had first showed up as colonizers. But that process is actually really advantageous to the goals of empire, and then ultimately to the goals of capital, because when you send those people, like violent, dangerous people who want to carve out their own plot of land, do whatever they want, don't want to be part of society, you send them out to the Americas were not an empty wasteland. It was filled with native people who had advanced societies, and they would come in contact with those people and they would kill them. And then that led to just more room. And when you have people who are out there, they're as atomized as they can be, like subsistence farmers out in like unhospitable terrain that they've never really been in, then it's easy for the army to come in and be like, well, actually, like it makes it so much easier to pave over that land. And that's how like westward expansion happened in the US, was like sending just basically like ragamuffins and like scoundrels and like warmongers out west, so that they could like subjugate the natives. And then once that process was complete, then it was very easy to just pave capital over them. And I think that process, honestly, the way we can tie this to Bezos is like that process has basically taken over the entire world at this point. There are very few places, since the fall of the Soviet Union, there's nowhere you can go to escape capitalism at all in this day and age. Even if I will tell you, I've been to Cuba, and you're not escaping capitalism down there, because they've got a big, capitalism maintains a chokehold on them. They're only doing as well as they are because of their system, but it's not like you're absent capitalism there. It's not like this utopia where you don't have to pay for anything. Like they I don't know, like Bezos now is going to the moon because he wants to like export all of our pollution there or something, so that we can clean up the earth, or like some weird shit. And of course, it's just, again, like, yeah, it's just capitals is going first around the entire world, and now beyond the limits of like the atmosphere, because it has to expand and multiply itself.
It has to keep expanding. Yep. And obviously throwing pollution out is very cost effective for capitalists. It's it's honestly, it might be the only solution. Like operating under capitalism, like it actually might be the only thing left that we can actually do, because we're so fucking deep in this shit. Like, you know what I mean?
We could build like a giant vacuum and just like suck up all the bad stuff and then reverse it, shoot it out into space.
We'll stick that.
But that's literally what they want to do.
So they literally are saying this, and honestly, like, I don't know, maybe that's the way we gotta do it. But like, there are certain things of like pollution where I'm like, how in the fuck are we ever gonna deal with that? Like they just like dump nuclear waste in the desert, like hundreds of miles down, and then Jason, I know you know about this, but like they like have signs on it that are in like basically in like pictograms. They're like, please don't open this, because it's like if in like 10,000 years some kind of like human society is like is going down there and they
Yeah,
just
and
open it up, it'll
discovers
be
it.
catastrophic for them still. They'll have no
Yeah.
fucking idea
They try to
why.
use the most basic symbol to like so that human beings, like sentient life, like whatever,
Oh my
But
god.
tens of
that's
thousands of
also
years in the future will like be able to recognize that symbol.
So arrogant that they think
That they
humans
even think, yeah, I
exist.
don't. Would they even? Would other sentient life even use symbols? I don't know.
yeah, and even that I think suggests like that how deep we think of individualism, that we think it's like a real natural trait of like humanity. Because I'm like,
Okay.
why would you assume that in like 10,000 years people would wander out to the fucking desert and want to like dig a hole? Like that's like
Right.
what you guys have done.
Maybe
Not
it'll be a
everybody was
wait,
like
though,
that.
because of global warming.
Well, yeah.
Wait, Sam, I want to point to the natural thing you said. And I think that it's important to talk about naturalization and how we naturalize individualism, because that is how we keep it running. So we like to think that, you know, being an individual is like a very natural phenomenon. We make it synonymous with the idea of a human being, right? Like you're a human being, so you're an individual. But that's something that we have to actively challenge every day if we're going to overcome any sort of and like institute the material change that we want. Like we have to fight the idea that like the individual like trumps everything. It's natural, and that's how ideology shrouds. And I really want to make it a point that, you know, when we talk about ideology, like for the audience, that when we talk about ideology, we're not talking about ideas. We're talking about actual ideology means material conditions. When we talk about individualism, we're not talking about this idea. We're talking about the actual relations between people, things, social institutions, the state, land, history. Like that's what ideology is. That's what individualism is.
I'd like to read a Marx quote if I can, that I think will really give us some background on what ideology means in the context of historical materialism, which is Marx's theory and method of history. From the German ideology. Definitely recommend reading part 1 if you're interested in what historical materialism is, and
Have we all read it? I think we might be all the biggest nerds possible.
You'll read it if you were if you're like dumb enough to go to grad school, they'll make you read it probably.
Hey, that's me. Yep, I was literally indoctrinated.
Okay, so yeah, it's a little long.
Just read it.
And I'm not going to rush through it because I think it's important. So he says, the ideas of the ruling class are in every epoch the ruling ideas, i.e., the class, which is the ruling material force of society, is at the same time its ruling intellectual force. The class, which has the means of material production at its disposal, has control at the same time over the means of mental production, so that thereby, generally speaking, the ideas of those who lack the means of mental production are subject to it. The ruling ideas are nothing more than the ideal expression of the dominant material relationships. The dominant material relationships grasped as ideas. And there's a follow-up here, but I just want to pause there for a second and kind of get into that last sentence and what Marx means by that. The ruling ideas are nothing more than the ideal expression of the dominant material relationships. So the ruling ideas of a society, the most popular ones, your common sense, the common sense of a society is nothing more than the expression of the dominant material relationships, but the ideal dominant material relationships. So we live under capitalism, and if you're a Marxist, there's plenty of critiques to be had of capitalism, but the ruling ideology won't necessarily it can make room for critique, but it won't make room for critique that'll actually challenge it too hard.
Mhm.
What we think is our common sense, the ruling ideas, the ideology, is the ideal expression of the way our society is structured. So it's freedom and liberty and being able to make it on your own, and individualism and everything that is nestled into that category of individualism. It's all the good things, leaving out most of the bad things. So that's why a liberal democracy can also be like a ridiculously segregated, like state sanctioned, like racism and discrimination, just kill people unilaterally around the world, whatever, but also we're a beacon of democracy, because
Yep.
that's the function of ideology, to make you think what we are doing is the opposite of what we are doing.
Yes. So real quick, I just want to jump in. So David Harvey, who's a Marxist geographer over at CUNY, he writes about neoliberalism a lot. Anyway, he says he has this chapter in his book Brief History of Neoliberalism where he talks about freedom as an ideology, and he essentially says that freedom is the big red button that they can press to go do anything. And he talks about in the context of the Iraq war, for freedom, so then we can go to war. So this is the ideal expression of like the shit they want to get in other countries and the shit they want to do to other people. It's freedom. And now the masses are like, yeah, fuck yeah, freedom. And now they can go do what they want to do. But they don't have to report back to the masses or anything like that. Like,
yeah. And you got to ask, like, what is freedom? Because when they say we're going to bring Iraqis freedom, or even in the ideal form, like what supporters think is going to happen when you invade Iraq, the definition of freedom is still like freedom to buy different shit. Like that's it. That's all they need.
Freedom is
and
this.
anyone
and
who
they couldn't
doesn't
even
want
do that.
that,
So
anyone who doesn't want that is a freak, according to
yeah,
these people.
exactly.
Like remember when
Hates
like
freedom.
in the post 9/11 years, like they hate us for our freedom. I remember the day
George Bush
after
said to
9/11
go shopping.
Yes, Bush said to go shopping the
That's
day
how
after
we
9/11
win.
because that's how you get back at them. And you know what? He might be onto something. He may have honestly been saying the quiet part out loud. Because honestly, like the Iraq war years and like the war in Afghanistan were maybe like a really good, like maybe that's something else we can get into and how it relates to individualism, because it also had the frontier mindset that we all have described. It was supposedly this like lawless, godforsaken land that needed to be tamed, as if they hadn't already been colonized by the British before and whatever. But I don't know. Maybe they didn't do as good a job as we could have, because we look like this. We're like dope cowboys and stuff. We're gonna.
And you could raise like a surplus from the land and sell it
right
on a market instead of like just like fur trading or whatever.
Yeah. I don't know. Like the idea that we were up against this like faceless enemy, but also the fact that like the average American was very, unless you knew someone who was in the armed forces, was very removed from it, especially like liberals too. Like we were talking about how liberals can talk about the society they want and then the society they actually create. I mean, like, Obama was all about how he was going to, end the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, had mixed results with both. Claimed he wanted to close Guantanamo, failed repeatedly at it, and even started war in Libya, and was, I think the Saudi arms that like the US sells them dates to Obama years where they were using it against the Yemenis. Obama also established AFRICOM, like just a center of like unaccountable military bases in the middle of like Central Africa. Why not? Who doesn't need that? And yeah, there was like I think in both cases, people were very divorced from the mere material reality of like what it means to be at war, especially because like with the Iraq and Afghanistan war, they just straight up put it on a credit card. They were like, we'll deal with this. Like they went like full Keynesians on war,
Yeah.
in the Bush years. And
If you live in the empire, in the center of empire, with a volunteer army, / mercenary army, you don't ever have to worry about it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's like about war.
But you individually, there were also a lot of people individually who were like living vicariously through that. Do you remember seeing like bumper stickers like "Remember the Towers, Get the Bastards" and shit like that? Like a lot. I remember like seeing like people who I went to middle school with sharing like proto memes on like MySpace and shit that said like "Get ready, Afghanistan," like this is what you got coming. It was like a picture of like cluster bombs and stuff, and I was just like,
there was that song "Time to Bomb Saddam."
Oh my fucking
that
god!
That was like a fucking meme song from 2005.
I hate this timeline, dude.
But yeah, no, you're absolutely right. They identify. I think it's great. The freedom-loving, like anti-government people just like identifying with the like most violent manifestation of the state.
But it's because it's so, and that's the problem. Like going back to German ideology, Marx, like that's the problem with ideology. It's the role of ideology is a camera obscura. Ideology shrouds, right? What its job is to shroud material relations, and it's so good at it. Like look how thick ideology is. We have bumper stickers, like we have songs. Like it's so good at its fucking job. Like you know what I mean?
And it's used as a weapon, definitely.
Yeah, it's a consent button. It's a big red button. Like,
but so I want to pivot because we've been talking about ideology, and it's I think it's crucial theoretical background for like, because otherwise someone might listen to this and be like, what? Who cares if people are individuals? Like, what does that mean? Like, what impact does that have on society? And I'm like, that's not what we're saying. We're talking about how individualism manifests itself in the material relation and social relations that we have to deal with day in day, and the things that actually drive history if you're a historical materialist. And I think with individualism, what you were saying, Kevin, that it's like a camera oscura, or Jason, what you were saying, where like the ideology of the ruling class is always going to be the ideal form, not the one that actually exists, because people don't want to see what already exists. People hate what already exists. If you told people that they were living in like individualist, if we could get everyone convinced that individualism was like the reason that everything's as bad as it is, and that you lived in a purely individualist state, then I think people would get on board. But we don't, because like no humans, it is like the opposite of how reality actually is, because no human society ever made it because of like I'm sorry, like even like hunter-gatherer societies, even like all the like any society you think back on of like these were just rugged frontiersmen or like wanderers. They only survived because there was more than one of them. There's humans on their own. We're not like tigers. We're not exactly. We're not tigers. We're not like apex
we're not
predators.
Fucking wolves. We're not. We're
even
lone
wolves.
Oh, wolves have like really
I'm not a biologist. I don't fucking know. But I only
said tiger because of the Chinese proverb. There can only be one tiger on the mountain, which I just butchered. Apologies to China for the second time.
Not familiar with that proverb. Thank you. No, I only said that because like we have this lone wolf like mythos of like success in this country. You know what I mean? Like we don't want to recognize our social relationships and like structure and where we are in society and positionality. Like that's the problem. Like
yeah, definitely. And I think so I think like you can't talk also about the way individualism is an ideology and about how it recreates society. I think we have to talk a little bit about how like recent it is. And honestly, I think a big part of like it's the current idea of individualism, the current ideology of individualism, the way it manifests in society today, is inextricable from white supremacy, especially if you relate it to empire, like we've been saying. It's not like people who aren't white can't be individualists and recreate that ideology and manifest it on their societies. Because I mean, I work in immigration. I work with plenty of people who are rugged individualists and are not white and are not from here and stuff. So that's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that like they are in a large way tied together. And I also don't want people,
Yes.
some conservative dingus is going to listen to this and think like I mean that individualism makes you, being individualistic makes you racist. Like that's not really what I mean. What I mean is like the way, like the ideology of individualism frequently is used as like it's sort of a, there's a solipsism and a narcissism to it that honestly remind me of white supremacy, because like when we're talking about with empire, they like the white settlers in the US were so solipsistic that they didn't see the natives as other people, or if they did, they didn't see them as other people in any kind of meaningful way where they would treat them like themselves. Like they didn't practice the golden rule is what I'm trying to say. But I don't know, like I guess like what are your thoughts on like how because we talked a bit about how it relates to empire, but I mean, empire is also inherently, white supremacist, the way it's done, last 500 years. So,
what's just interesting historically about that is in a lot of cases, settlers did think of in North America, did think of the indigenous peoples as people, but they kind of have like different categories, and they have like their own ideology back then. We're like, they're people, but they're savages. Savages are people, but they're people who live like us Europeans lived before we had farming.
Yeah.
Which like I mean, there's a whole bunch going on there, but
and we agree wholeheartedly.
They recognize what
we agree wholeheartedly with all of it.
Yeah. But they like granted these tribes sovereignty. That's how they were able to sign the treaties with them. They saw them as like sovereign people, sovereign nations that you can go sign a treaty with at the table. But that it didn't matter when they wanted land. Like they weren't under impression like, oh, like we're killing something less than human to settle this land or something. They're like, oh no, like I mean, yeah, they're people, but we need that land, so
we need the land.
Yeah. So like, what are you gonna do? Was basically it's just like interesting. It's contradictory.
They're also doing the I think you should leave bit where it's like they don't really matter. So like but yeah, sorry, Kevin, I think you were gonna say something.
Yeah, wait, could you just repeat your question? I just want to get everything in my head right before I say it.
Sure. I guess I was just asking like what like how can we describe the connection between white supremacy and individualism and or the individualist like Western ideology and like without it sounding like if you're an individual, if you feel like you're an individualist, you're a racist or something like that.
So I think it's really important, and Sam, you kind of mentioned this, but when we're talking about individualism, we're not talking about the individual, the life force. We're not talking about the soul, right? We're talking about something social, something interpersonal, something interactional, something relating to outside of you. So I just want to make that distinction clear. Like, we're not talking about you being an individual as being bad, but rather the relationship of how this ideology operates and your connection to it being bad. I think that, when we think about individualism today, let's just in American society, I think it's a camera obscura because it really does shrouds our material conditions and our positional relationship to labor and capital. So when we perpetuate this ideology of individualism, it's constructing a very particular type of freedom, a very classed, raced, gendered form of freedom. So when we're talking about individual freedom, we're not talking about everyone's individual freedom. We're talking about where is the power? Who has the power to be free individuals? That's real individualism, right? So we're talking about like rich white people or like even rich transnational, like the transnational elite, right? So I think it's important for us to be able to identify power when we're talking about individualism. Like, where is the power, and how is individualism constructed in a way to keep them powerful, right? So my idea of individualism is not the same as Jeff Bezos's idea of individualism and freedom. He probably thinks his individual freedom is like, this is natural. This is how society is structured in a way for me, and I'm an individual. But society isn't structured that way for everyone, right? Like, we know that. We know of all the different forms of oppression and the differential access to institutions and healthcare and all that shit. Like, how is that freedom? So I think that's how I want to respond. That when we think about individualism, we're thinking about power and the disempowered, but we're talking about it like it's equal access to power all around. You know what I mean? We're talking about like it's an individualism for everybody, but it's not. If we keep operating under this form of individualism, we get what we are in right now, and we keep perpetuating it. Like, this is what individualism, it's all of these forms of oppression. And like, even now we have fucking vaccine inequalities, right? Like, this is your individualism.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think it's interesting in the like in the sense of how, yeah, like you said, Jeff Bezos has a different idea of individualism than any of us can have, because he's had much more go his way, and he's in it there. I think where I'm going with this is that, like, it makes me think of when people are like, oh, you could be the next Bill Gates, or like someone else could be the next Jeff Bezos or something, or like, and I'm like, there can really only ever be one like, we're at the stage in human development, I think, where like we can't really sustain another Jeff Bezos. You know what I mean? Like, he's already kind of, I don't know. There's a very
unless we go into
obvious,
space.
Unless he succeeds and we get to live in space. And honestly, that's something that's like really dark, because we've been talking a lot about how individualism can, like, how ideology replicates itself, how the ruling class's ideology, and how they're able to like impose it on people, and also how they're able to sustain it and recreate it. Like, and sort of, Kevin, what you said earlier, like, how else can we develop, like, because of pollution and stuff? Now it's like, are we going to be living in Jeff Bezos's hell world, where we're going to, depend on sending all of our pollution to the moon? Or like, what was his idea? We're going to live on the moon so that we can clean up Earth with like robots, and like, I mean, they'll probably send poor people down there to like shovel shit in toxic waste and stuff. I don't know.
Wally. You just watched Wally.
Yeah, I mean, it basically is like, yeah, I mean, I that's another interesting like vision of the future. It's like, I wonder, like, with it reproducing itself to such a degree and it being so entrenched, like, how could we avert a future where we don't rely on Jeff Bezos succeeding and setting up moon colonies to like, because if he did that, and if I actually thought that's what he wanted to do, and if I thought he wanted to do that for a good reason, I'd be like, well, I mean, it's what we got to do. I don't know anybody else who's working on it like this. But again, individualism is a lie, and he's not going to do it for these reasons. And if he does succeed in doing it, it won't be him doing it himself. It'll be like all of the workers. It'll be the people who actually do it. But we'll still think of it this way, as the Jeff Bezos himself went up and like rolled his sleeves up and solved the pollution problem, which is a lot of how people view Elon Musk and Bill Gates and all these other, billionaire entrepreneurs.
I think that question is like one of the like deepest, it's our biggest challenge right now. Like, how do we prevent this? Right? Because I think when we talked about individualism, it's like we operate under it. It's important. I think that way too. Everyone thinks that. Everyone is kind of forced to think that way because this is the society we live in. So it makes it that much harder to actually disentangle ourselves from it. And it sometimes feels like super deterministic and hopeless. And I think this is the question that we should tackle, like, here and also in our society today. Like,
yeah, I it's interesting for me is like I'm an only child, and I have never really like the idea of being alone is like my most of my life. And and you know, also, you know, single parent for most of my life as well. So I was like, I have always been like weirdly social, even though I'm like a loner in many ways and I'm a characteristic only child. I still like, I don't know. I find it like if I just sit down and think about it, like in the abstract, thinking about just being, you know, being the platonic ideal of like you know, someone like Jeff Bezos who can just escape the travails of the world and go to space or something and like live on the moon by myself and sing the songs I want to sing. Like, that never appeals to me on a like on that like simple level. Like if I were to envision my future, that's like the opposite of what I would envision. Like I've always sought more like connection and like community with other people because I've like lacked it for a large part of my life in many ways. And like I don't know, I guess like I've been thinking about it a lot because I've been trying, like you said, to brainstorm like how do we get people to realize like it's good to feel belonging, it's good to be part of a collective. Like we've been fed so much nonsense about like you don't want to be just part of the machine, man. But then you like, there's no real way to like anything happens without
you are part of the
action.
machine. Like no matter what.
Yeah, you're already part of a collective. It's just a collective that's
collective that hates each other. Like
yeah, there's a collective that's just being like super exploited and driven towards extinction
right
by like 100 people.
Yeah.
And not being able to imagine anything different, which is
that's the thing. Like we need to dedicate a lot of energy and time to imagining an alternate reality. Like that's the only thing that'll happen. So I think two things need to happen. First, in order to do anything about this situation, we need to identify again where power is, and we need to be able to point to it, right? Like that's why we love critiquing Jeff Bezos, because we know he's fucking evil.
Yeah.
But we don't know how he's evil exactly. Like we don't understand like the mechanisms that relate to Bezos and like a worker in Poland working at a fulfillment center and why he can't feed his family, right? Like we need to be able to do that. Like this is a task of the left, but this is a task of everybody. Like even the right seems to hate rich people. I don't know what it's a very convoluted
they
ideology.
did some weird shit on like the
they do weird shit.
Show.
But
they're
like,
oh, Amazon's bad because they're bringing in immigrants or something. I don't know. It's weird.
Oh, that's a whole nother thing. But like seriously, like if we can't even point to the enemy and like understand like what power is, it's just we're just talking in circles.
And what I find like so unfortunate.
Also,
sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, in addition to that, we also have to find a way to take power, like like destroy their power. Because you people identify the enemy, but it doesn't help to identify the enemy if you're like, oh, he's above me, stomping on my head, like, and you're not able to do anything about it.
Right. So we need
we have to find a way to be able to do something about it, which is, the question for the left.
And that involves that involves collective thinking and collective, like it can't be like, because if it was as simple as like killing Jeff Bezos, then we could do it. It would be easy.
Oh, imagine, like, holy shit.
I mean, I'm not
saying
you
could kill everybody in power.
And it would society would recreate
just all the billionaires, all the politicians, and somebody will just like take their spot.
Yeah, because we, the working class, the subjugated, will make sure it stays in place. Like, right? Like that's why it's so hard.
It's all we know unless we can imagine something else.
Yes.
And so and it's interesting to me because I'm like, even if you want to like begin the work of like pointing at Amazon as like a collective issue and like, or like a large, like a societal issue or a systemic issue, which in the United States, you could argue it is. You can't really use the internet to a large degree without using Amazon products. And like, I remember reading somewhere that like only like a third of their money comes from like their retail side. The rest of it is business to business, tech consulting and sales. And that's something that you could never boycott that unless you like happen to run you know, a cybersecurity firm or something, which
Right.
in which case you probably would be happy to go buy the Amazon software and you want to become Jeff Bezos and stuff. But like as you start to like wonder, like, because if Jeff Bezos were to drop dead tomorrow, I mean, he's not even the CEO of Amazon anymore. Amazon, yeah, but God willing, it would be fun if he did. But like, even if he did, we would be stuck with confronting the issue of all the people who would rise to take his place. And that's where you start to, I don't want to say like we have to take personal responsibility here because that's like some dumb individualist bullshit. But like, there is a certain like reckoning that I think people that like broadly as a collective like society we need to have of like, how do we like imagine some, I think the way to do it is to imagine something different, but how do we like point the finger at the ills in society? Because at a certain level, you're going to end up pointing at yourself depending on where you sit in the system. You know, like I know plenty, I bought from Amazon. I know plenty of people who work for Amazon. I don't agree with my employer. I'm not sure how you guys feel about yours. Like there's a certain level to like, it's so difficult because we are so used to approaching it from an individualist framework. And we think if we could just like, if this one person could just do this one thing to this one guy, then it would change things. Like it's like hard to work up the stamina for like the sustained kind of like collective activity that we need in order to like avert this future. And especially because it's even hard to imagine it differently.
I think there has to be a positive, like humanistic way to think about this. And I think that, you know, us on the left and just we tend to want to point up and look at, you know, capitalism and its main actors as like the issue and stuff. But I think when we want to think about what we're going to do, like it can be helpful to look at our immediate surroundings, and it could be helpful to like try to begin to articulate and manifest the different struggles of peoples, right? Like how does the organizing of Amazon Poland's workers relate to the grad strike of Columbia? How are all our struggles like what works? Like what is working on the ground when we're talking to each other and like identifying issues and things we don't have? There's a lot that works actually on the ground. So I think that, you know, while us critiquing the top and like people like Bezos and these systems are important, like what's going to actually pull us out of this and like actually give us material change is possibly just like in our communities and our workplaces and our ability to like link our struggle to other people's struggles, like regardless.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you guys don't have if you have anything else you want to, we're at about an hour. If you have anything else you want to mention, speak now or forever hold your peace until I read yet another Karl Marx quote.
No, that's okay.
Take your time.
You're so stoned. Oh my god. Am
I
the
was
only?
also I have a quote that I wanted. It's like my favorite quote, but if Sam is gonna read a quote directly after
we
this,
can
Let's
have
just
more
do
than
quotes.
we're
Let's
just
do a
doing
quote
quotes to close
sesh.
out. Anyway, so I made it through Capital the first time. I did it with a group because if I read it by myself, I would have been like, what the fuck does this even say? Because I'm dumb. But but yeah, there was one that's in volume 1 that really stuck out to me, which was when Marx says, he says it's something like, when workers cooperate, they strip off the fetters of their individuality and develop the capabilities of their species. And I read that and I was like, damn, like I've been told the fucking opposite my whole life. Like pop psychology these days is all like, dump your friends who make you feel sad. You know, strike out on your own. Like even the hero's journey and like Star Wars and stuff like that, it's about like, obviously a part of it is like inspired by Buddhism and like forgoing attachment, but the hero's journey is also very individualistic, and it's like you have to leave people behind to do what's right for them. Like you have to, or like even like a shitty recent example, like the Dark Knight movie, it's all like, oh, he's the hero that Gotham deserves or needs, not the one it deserves, or whatever the fuck the dichotomy there was. But there was always this sense of like, yeah, like the way things get done is when like one great man stands up and answers the call, which makes for a fun like movie or a story, but it's not at all how society has ever worked. And I'm thinking about that, I was just like, I was blown away. And like Kevin, what you were saying about like how some things on the ground work well, that's true. Like, okay, the fact that you're able to get a lot of resources through Amazon should be a good thing. And the reason you could say it happens, I mean, there's bad extractive policies that they have, but they also, I mean, people working together can accomplish a lot. I mean, and there's no reason to discount that. There are examples you can point to. And if you start doing that, you start seeing how, like, you know, if you've ever been through like the checkout line at a Costco, like those people are working like really well together. And they like, and that's like, that is beautiful. And it's not like I have to thank the CEO of Costco for that necessarily. Like, I think it's like, maybe there's a process where you can start like kind of cracking yourself out of this mentality by seeing like how things actually work. Like the only way things work is when people work together. It's not just like some guy in an ivory tower dreams something up.
Specifically work together to subvert power. Like like when we organize and like try to fight for what our labor means, right? Like I think there's a lot there, and there's a, you know, labor historians can talk a lot more. Even Jason might be able to talk more about this, but it's just, there's a long history there, and there's a long history of victories and a long history of things that have worked for us and how we live today. And I think that's where we have to look.
Yeah.
But yes.
And in that case, like I feel like when there are things like that work, they want to point out to one person who, you know, if you talk about the Soviet Union, like plenty of things, there's plenty of like everyday heroism and people working well together. And then there was Stalin killing every revolutionary. But if you ask like a liberal about the Soviet Union, they would never tell you about any of the good things. They would only tell you like this one dastardly man created a dictatorship. Or the same thing with Cuba. They wouldn't mind to say Cuba's a dictatorship. I'm like, they changed head of state as many times as we did in the last 12 years. What do you fucking want? Like, me alone. I don't know. People are always like, oh, nothing works there because it's badly governed. And I'm like, no, plenty of things work there.
Everything works here.
As if anything works here. But plenty of things work really well there. And it's because people work together. And like, that's
despite the embargo and shit.
Yeah. There's like everyday heroism and people like sticking out their neck for one another. And, you know, and altruism is not alien to the human species. It's not even alien to the animal kingdom. Most animals, a lot of animals exhibit altruism, sometimes even not for the propagation of their own species, just because it's like their nature to do so. So I don't know. It's not like this weird thing, I think is what I wanted to say about with like that Marx quote, is like you shouldn't feel weird about seeking out like conformity. Like if it leads you to something bad isn't good, but like if you feel a connection with a group, you shouldn't face this pressure to like strike out and become an individual or whatever the fuck.
Yeah.
You can even, I mean, I agree. I think altruism is just as much a part of human nature as everything else. But you don't even need the altruism, just cooperation.
Yep.
Like factories, the industrial revolution only happened because you're able to get a bunch of people in one place and cooperate, and like have them cooperate to mass produce products and whatnot. So it's cooperation is necessary to human survival, whatever the political economy of your society is.
Yeah. It would be cool if, you know, moving forward, because everyone's so atomized these days, if it just really fucks up their labor process. But I'm thinking in the US, they don't even really rely on they do rely on American labor, but they also outsource so much stuff.
We're like a dumping ground for products made.
Yeah.
Elsewhere.
I don't know.
Hey,
and then we dump our trash there.
My dissertation is actually about how the migration as a global labor supply. So I think, you know, our industry migration is heavily a feature of capitalism. Immigration is a capitalist invention, the way we see it today. So I completely agree. But if I could just say one thing, like probably my last thing, but I think that it's really important to look at the last few months, especially like at the start of this pandemic. There was, I think a lot of people on the left feel this kind of disappointment too, but there was a real moment there. Like there was a real moment when we fantasized about seizing control and seizing power and like standing up for ourselves as workers. And I think that, you know, they successfully thwarted that. But, you know, when the pandemic first started, like bosses were scared. Like people were organizing and being like, I want a safe environment. You know, I don't want to fucking die and come to work. And that cooperation was power. Like we were subverting power so hard that they were literally terrified. You know, and that may have been a brief moment in history, but we just have to I think one thing this pandemic showed us is that like it is so possible. Like we're so in this right now, and we think that it's hopeless, and it's easy to feel like it's hopeless, but maybe it's not. Like I don't think it's as hard as we think. I just think that we just fall victim to becoming confused and not knowing who the enemies are and our friends are. And yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you that there was like a moment last summer where I was like, maybe things are gonna fall, are actually gonna be destabilized, and maybe in a good way. And I always find that like the petty divisions that people feel between one another, and like the cynicism you see on like social media or in like interpersonal interactions, like when you're in like a protest or like on the ground somewhere, like if it's a good one, then all that stuff sort of like melts away and you see how people can cooperate. And then something else that I think about is you know, if Bezos wants to go to the moon and stuff, he's gonna need us to do it, you know, like at the end of the day, these guys aren't going to be able to wreak their most twisted fantasies on us unilaterally, not yet. I mean, they may try to get there, but I don't know. Like in the meantime, they're not going to get there without us. So hopefully that's like some a positive note to end it on. Jason, I feel like you're itching to get off your last Marx quote. No, he's not.
No, I was
anymore.
just petting Lou.
That you're just scratching your Marx itch.
He's asleep next to me.
But yeah, thank you guys for joining. Do you have anything to plug to the Hog fans?
I do not. I am a failure of an academic and have nothing in the works. But hey, that's okay. It's okay.
That's a cool radical academic thing to do, though.
Yeah,
just like,
exactly.
I'm not, like, working on anything.
I don't do anything.
Radical laziness.
Right.
Check out Cosmonaut magazine. It's a little too. Never mind, Dan. Cut that part. Let me start over.
He's not cutting anything.
Jason, just
my
plug
girlfriend's
your
always
thing.
making faces at me.
Okay,
Stop,
well,
Jason. Just plug your thing.
I will plug
Cosmonaut
Cosmonaut
magazine
for you. They're great. Cosmonaut
Check it
magazine.
out. Yeah, that's all.
Yeah, Jason writes for them, and they're can only go so far into the world of theory because, as you guys have heard for the last hour or so, I'm very dumb. But if you're into this sort of stuff and you like talking about things theoretically, then like Cosmopod is really like, they've got some really dense analysis. I understand some of the episodes. I really like their podcast episode about Cuba during the special period. And they're just putting out lots of great content, and it's very smart. So definitely that's something you should check out if you're interested in this. I will plug Ward 2 Mutual Aid, which is the aid organization that I have been working with in my neighborhood in DC. They do great direct action and work with the homeless, and they do grocery distribution and a bunch of other things. They desperately need money. So if you're a rich person listening to this, or even if you have like a little extra money to throw, I mean, $5 a month goes a long way for them. And I think it's definitely worth your time. And I'll put the donation link in the show notes so you can check them out and see what they're about. But yeah, other than that, this is Hog Planet. And no apologies to Dan for the shitty production on this. Figure it out.